some of the regions of strongest biocultural diversity in interdependence of people and environment, but everywhere in the world where there are people, there is a close relationship with the local environment. It's only that in tropical regions, the geography, the climate, and other biogeographic factors tend to foster the concentration of large numbers of small groups having distinct cultures and speaking different languages, but we shouldn't think that at higher latitudes or in deserts there is less of a close link between people and the environment. But because we're talking about biocultural diversity in Asia-Pacific islands, what I did was to zoom in. This is a detail of the same map that you just saw, which shows biocultural diversity in the Asia-Pacific. And this is one of the real hotbeds of biocultural diversity. For instance, you see the island of New Guinea, divided up, of course, between Papua New Guinea and West Papua, which is part of Indonesia. That's if you think that there are something between 6,000 and 7,000 languages in the world, that island itself has more than 1,000 or maybe 1,500. So you can imagine the level of cultural diversity there, and of course, as we know, it is also one of the centers of biodiversity. And generally speaking, the Asia-Pacific region is really an area of high biocultural diversity. What I also wanted to show you about the Asia-Pacific is another map. This was made by my colleague Rick Stepp. What this map shows is in red the distribution of population. So high concentration of population, human population shown in red, and the green dots instead are the distribution of languages, of different languages. So by and large, what you can see is that where there is high population density, meaning high development, there aren't too many green dots for linguistic diversity, and vice versa. So we immediately begin to see what the issue, the key issue with biocultural diversity is, that human development really works against it. And if I did the same map showing instead biodiversity, you would see pretty much the same phenomenon. Where there is high development, there is low diversity, whether in nature or in culture. So that's something to keep in mind as we think of our topic here. What is so special about island biocultural systems? We all have this image, at least many of us in Europe and North America think of islands as these tropical paradises. They're very attractive, of course, for tourism, and that's both their beauty and their downfall, because islands are, by their nature, very bioculturally rich. Through the close interaction between people and the environment in closed and confined spaces, small bits of land separated from the rest by vast expanses of sea or ocean. So there tends to be a lot of endemic diversity, both in nature and culture. And that's also what makes islands fragile and vulnerable to all kinds of ecological and cultural disturbances that range from biological disturbances to human disturbances. Alien invasive species, as most of you know, are especially destructive on islands. Habitat loss and fragmentation is especially detrimental on islands because, again, of the small confined spaces. And on the human side, the equivalent of alien invasive species is the influx of non-native population, generally linked to land use, tenure and land use changes and overuse of natural resources. Now, admittedly, I have not worked on or in Asia Pacific islands, but I thought that I would talk about an island on the other side of the Pacific that I feel particularly passionate about, because that's where I live. I live on this island, Salisbury Island, in British Columbia, on the west coast of Canada. Most of you probably know of Vancouver on the mainland. The big island that you see there is Vancouver Island, and in between the two there is a group of islands called the Gulf Islands, and Salisbury Island is the largest of those islands, about 180 kilometers square kilometers in surface. And what does Salisbury Island look like? This is the landscape. It is part of the coastal Douglas fir ecosystem, tropical temperate rainforest, which is a very rare and endangered ecosystem. So you get a sense of the landscape and the seascape on my island. Who were the first inhabitants of those islands and that entire region? The Coast Salish indigenous peoples, divided up in many groups and tribes. They were semi-nomadic people. Their life was based on fishing, hunting, gathering, and they followed the seasons. They used their canoes to move from one island to the other. During spring, summer, and fall, they would move around following the fish, following resources, fish, shellfish, and animals and plants that they gathered. And in winter, they would go back to their winter villages, and according to their traditional calendar, which you see here, that was the time to put away the paddles of their canoes. And it was story time, time for storytelling, and that was the way in which the elders transmitted to the younger generations the traditional knowledge about how to live in this bountiful but fragile island environment. They had extraordinary cultural traditions. Some of you may know them as the makers of these incredible totems, extremely tall, tens of meters tall, that adorn their villages. But in the 1800s, things started to change with the incoming of European and other settlers. The Europeans were first. On the left, you can see the first farms that were carved by cutting down the huge fir trees and other native trees to make farms that certainly became very bountiful. Vast production of fruit and vegetables, sheep and cattle. And you know the logging, of course, to create the farms also fueled the logging industry, and this is the image of in the middle of the size of some of the trees that were being cut down at that time. But there were also people from other ethnicities who came to Salisbury Island. This small island had quite a bit of diversity. Japanese settlers, Hawaiian settlers, and even African American settlers who came north from the United States looking for a better life because of the racism in the United States. So of course this transformed the landscape radically. It took the land away from the first peoples, and there was forest laws to establish agriculture. But once agriculture was established, of course, these farmers also developed their own traditional knowledge, which was deep, and lots of new local knowledge was created. What remains on all of Salisbury Island that is still indigenous land is a very tiny bit of land on the south end of our island, which is an indigenous reserve for the Saanich people. And every year The Saanich people who were moved to a reserve and now live on Vancouver Island come back to our island to spend several days, come by canoe and spend several days trying to celebrating their connection with the island and trying to revitalize their traditions, their traditional knowledge about fishing and fishing gear, and their language through song. And this is John Elliott, the current elder for the Saanich tribe, leading these excursions back to their summer camp on Salisbury Island. How is agriculture, the agriculture that the pioneers introduced, doing on our island? It's still very much alive. We have a beautiful market that sells all kinds of products. Animal husbandry is still happening, but only 4% of our food needs are now satisfied by local agriculture. And indeed, there is a lot of abandonment of agricultural lands. Fishing is also very much threatened by overfishing and fish farms. And pressures are, you know, the usual pressures of development with shoreline restructuring, mass tourism, marine pollution, and so on and so forth. You could think that you know, you look out on a good day and it still looks beautiful, but that's what you also see: algal blooms from pollution, marine water pollution, and a lot of clear cuts. And there are still lots of rare and endemic species like oyster catcher and garter snakes, and a special breed of hippies who I can assure you are only found on Salisbury Island. But there's also alien species such as Scotch broom and the monster bullfrog. And because we don't have predators anymore, we have a surfeit of deer which have been destroying the native vegetation and are also causing problems with health problems because they carry the ticks that carry Lyme disease. So we have mounting pressures that really are manifesting themselves, especially in terms of our water resources. Water is becoming more scarce, more polluted. We have toxic algal blooms in our drinking lakes, and the push for further growth, which is there, is really unsustainable. This is our main freshwater lake on Salisbury Island. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, the Canadian government and the government of British Columbia recognized the ecological and cultural importance of these islands and created the Island Trust as a land management mechanism to have some control on land use decisions. But the work of the Island Trust hasn't been enough because it is powerless in the face of private property. So if you own land, and most of the land is now owned privately on Salisbury Island, you pretty much can do whatever you want. And there are lots of initiatives that try to restore the ecological and cultural health of Salisbury Island, including one called the Healthy Ecosystem and Healthy Community Initiative that myself and my ecologist husband, Dr. David Rapport, run as a volunteer community project. But it's not enough. And so now going back from Salisbury Island to the Asia Pacific, to the Pacific Rim, we can see that islands throughout the Pacific and beyond are experiencing similar problems, and that biocultural diversity and ecocultural health really are needed as guiding concepts globally for taking action. And that's why I support, and I supported, continue to support the Island Biocultural Diversity Initiative, because union is strength. And so if we work together to to address the problems of islands in the Asia Pacific and everywhere, we are more likely to succeed. Our foremost goal must be to sustain the life that sustains us and all the other species in island ecosystems and all ecosystems. It's not going to be easy because we're still subject to the economic imperative of economic growth, but we're beginning to recognize that there are no jobs on a dead planet. It's challenging because we have become so disconnected from nature that some are saying we're suffering from nature deficit disorder. But we can learn again the sense of place and the language of nature, and we really can and must do that. And I want to conclude with the words of a Saanich elder, the father of the elder John Eliot, whom you saw in the previous pictures. And he said, our people lived as part of everything. We were so much a part of nature. We were just like the birds, the animals, the fish. We were like the mountains. Our people lived that way. And again, we can and must do it ourselves again. Thank you.
Goes on very limited time. I'm very sorry to ask to kick presentation. Next, we move to the presentations from the Stanford Gent.
First, I want to thank Dr. Hong for the invitation to be here, and to all of you for taking your time to listen. Now, I think it's fitting that the Island Biocultural Diversity Initiative and this workshop be held here on Jeonju, which is a potent symbol for both the endurance and the fragility of traditional ecological knowledge. Of course, through the world-famous Ainu or breath-hold sea divers, which tradition that stretches back over more than 1,500 years, but a tradition that is currently being threatened because many young women are not following the paths of their mothers or grandmothers and picking it up. And I'm going to be talking about a tool that we've developed that can possibly be used to support and strengthen this sort of traditional ecological knowledge. Traditional ecological knowledge is, of course, very important for many reasons. It's something that is central to cultural diversity, penetrating culture in many of its aspects, too many to go through in detail here today. It's from a local level, it's fundamental for most aspects of daily life, from food production, health, housing, social institutions, employment, cultural identity and heritage, and of course, environmental conservation. Now, what's the problem? As mentioned by Louisa and Dr. Hong, these systems are being deeply impacted all over the world, especially in our island environments, through globalization and environmental change. And there's a number of conditioning factors that are involved, from language shift to education, economic change, a whole number of factors that are related to this. And this sort of change has been documented through many, many different countries and places, different kinds of ecosystems, different kinds of cultural populations throughout the world. For example, here's one study that was done in Micronesia, and a very important island environment, in which they showed recent erosion of different forms of traditional technology. Now, well, we've been working on an indicator, something that measures status and trends of traditional ecological knowledge, and this sort of work is justified because the important role that traditional knowledge plays in biodiversity conservation. Tech is situated at the interface of this human-nature linkage, and we need reliable tools that are capable of measuring whether knowledge is being eroded, retained, or increased. How fast are these processes occurring? What areas of groups are most affected? What kinds of knowledge are most affected? And what kinds of factors are related to this? So we really need more precise information to do something concrete about it, including formulate policy measures. Now, what do we mean by an indicator? A measure based on qualitative or quantitative data which reflects a dynamic state or trend of a complex process. In this case, the retention or change of traditional environmental